Hello, my name is Matthew, and I've been reading The Life of Samuel Johnson by James Boswell, and this is our third installment. This past week I read pages 500 to 750, and I feel pretty good. And if you're reading along at home, I hope you also, at this point, have a feeling of accomplishment. The ending, finishing the book already feels attainable and almost easy. And especially for me, because this third installment was probably the most difficult to get through. It was still incredibly enjoyable, but Johnson's life in the book, we zoom into a street level, day to day activity of Johnson and Boswell interacting. And it's them waking up in the morning and having breakfast and going out and having lunch and going out and having dinner and then going home and going to bed and waking up the next morning. And all the while they're having really interesting, dynamic conversations. That's what's driving the book, is just these conversations, what Johnson has to say. But it's day after day. We're just almost reading by the minute. And when you're on page 500 and it's page after page, I start asking myself, what are the rest of the 500 pages going to be? Is it just going to be like the daily activities of Johnson until it ends? And I had a moment of revelation, or just a better understanding of what the book is. And to me, it's more of Boswell's life with Johnson. And it's very clear that this portion of the book is actually what Boswell was really interested in. It's telling us about his relationship with Johnson instead of a classical idea of a formal biography, talking about the big events in somebody's life, or momentous occasions, or certain tragedies, or emotionally filled portions in someone's life. Um, Boswell wants to tell us not only who Johnson was as a person, but his relationship to Boswell. And when I started getting that in my head, I was able to rest easy. And there's something in the back of my mind the whole time, which is Johnson is going to die at some point in this book, I imagine. And spending all this time in the room with Johnson and Boswell, listening to their conversations and their spats and their really odd antics, it starts to have this emotional injection in the book, because we're leading up to a loss at some point. I did take some notes, and unfortunately, the more I've learned who Johnson is as a person, the less I respect him. And it's not just these old-fashioned opinions from hundreds of years ago. His perspective on women, or the poor, or marriage, or his sense of superiority as a person and his station in life, but also his sense of nationalism, the superiority of England over all the other countries. He loves to dig at Scotland, and if you're not a proper Englishman, you're basically an uncivilized barbarian. None of those things bother me. It's actually the underlying thought process that he has. Um, he's basically stuck in this static position where, one, he's always been right. In conversation, he's grossly insulted if anyone at the table doesn't already begin a conversation with, Johnson's going to be right, and no matter what we say, when Johnson speaks, that's going to be the correct opinion. Any pushback on Johnson, he gets insulted and bitter. And his behavior, the way that he's so childish and petty, and with his friend Boswell, he will just insult Boswell in front of company. And when Boswell approaches him about it and says, "Why did you have to be so critical?" And Johnson just says, "Well, I couldn't really help it." And it's a quality that when I see today in a person, when someone says, "Well, I don't have any filter, there's nothing I can do about it, just whatever I say comes out of my mouth," to me it's just a sign of disrespect and just purposefully being rude and selfish, and not taking part in the social contract of having company and having conversation and being polite. These are basic things that are expected in a person, and especially for a proper civilized English person. Johnson, meanwhile, did suffer from depression. He talks about the only possibility of happiness in a man's life is from being drunk. And Boswell, who's a drinker, even pushes back on this and says, well, surely there's other things. There's love and family and the arts and literature and our poetry. And Johnson basically dismisses all of them and says, no, it's just being drunk. And even with someone who's neurotic and has depression, I don't think that's an excuse for purposefully being discourteous. If you're so completely discombobulated that you can't have basic decency, then you shouldn't be at the table. You shouldn't be entertaining people or going out and having dinner. It's just rude. Another quality that I don't like about Johnson, and in anybody that I meet, is this idea that the world was leading up to this perfect state that just happened, and we've moved on, and Johnson now sees this static picture of an ideal world that was just in his youth. He happened to live right at the perfect moment where the English language was perfect, and all of the poetry was perfect, and all of the novels were perfect, and everyone was acting perfectly. And any deviation from his idealized past is a bastardization of what's correct, instead of the really obvious conclusion that the whole world is a work in progress, and every generation is basically better than the one before, and smarter than before, and more clever than the generation before. Johnson's just old-fashioned and rigid. There's no flexibility in his mindset. The golden age of civilization has passed. And a great example of that is, let's see. Here's another example of Johnson correcting Boswell's English in conversation. Boswell used the term make money, the phrase to make money, and Johnson's response: he found fault with me for using the phrase to make money. Don't you see, he said, the impropriety of it? To make money is to coin it. You should say get money. The phrase, however, I think pretty current. But Johnson was at all times jealous of infractions upon genuine English. And it goes on, but um, the idea of the English language evolving to him was colloquial barbarism. And for someone that actually wrote the dictionary, I could see that just driving him insane as he gets older and people are using the English language differently than how he set it in stone. Um, let's see. Now, I should say the genius of this book, the thing that really makes me enjoy reading it, is even though I don't like Johnson as a person, I still haven't read his writing, which could totally change my viewpoint on the book or on him. But I love that Boswell knows Johnson. So I've met people like this where I'm glad someone else is friends with some crazy person that I get to hear about. It's like living next to Kramer. I wouldn't want to live next to Kramer, but I'm so glad that Jerry did. I get to hear all of the antics, all of the fascinating, interesting, odd parts of somebody's life without having to deal with it. And Boswell and Johnson are just this old married couple, and they bicker and they can be petty and have these back and forth arguments. When Boswell goes back to Scotland and they're writing letters back and forth, you can tell that there's a strain on their relationship. They're having this long distance relationship, and they can't really seem to be on friendly terms until they get back together. And through all of the arguments that they have and the back and forth and insults and things like that, there still is this base level of, even if it's not respect, there's affection. They're very affectionate towards one another and need to love one another. Well, one thing that I just thought was very funny was, and it's a good idea of how it almost doesn't work as a biography, is Boswell talking about how he would like to invent some sort of incline, mechanical, automated incline in his bed to help him wake up in the morning. Like something out of Wallace and Gromit, where each morning his bed will tilt up and pop him upright into his day. It's things like that where you read it and go like, why on earth is Boswell telling us about his fantasies of some new invention of waking up in the morning in a Johnson biography? And it's because the book is about their relationship. Of all the people in the world, it had to be Boswell. And a great indicator is the first quarter of the book, when we're getting this reportage of Johnson's life before Boswell, and we have all these different people talking about Johnson, how they knew him. Everyone says that he was a genius, and he was brilliant, and this amazing man of letters, and things like that. And it's at this point now that I look back and think about the omissions. No one was saying that he was a good person or good company. They talk about how he was this great talker, but he was domineering. It might be nice to sit at the table while everybody's talking, but no one really talks about how they enjoyed their specific conversation with Johnson. And at this point, when you realize that Johnson is such an odd character and such a bear to be around, it seems like there was a strain for him to keep company and to have um, positive relationships in his life. And he found that in Boswell, and Boswell is the type of person that could handle um, Johnson's huge personality in a way that I think most people met him and were happy to have met him. Let's see. So I enjoyed it. It's fascinating listening to um, all of these fast-paced conversations that just come one right after the other. Like learning that Johnson likes ghosts or believes in ghosts, and if someone mentions like, "Well, how could you believe in ghosts?" I just fly off in a rage. Well, you can't prove it either way. Um, as a work of biography, I think it's something entirely different. And when I got that out of my head, I was able to just settle in at the table with these two characters and enjoy myself. Um, I'm imagining that it's going to be more of the same for the last couple hundred pages. Um, and I think the last portion is going to be the most emotional because um, if it's in the book, Boswell is about to lose a very close friend. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts if you've been reading along. Please let me know. Um, and that's it. Leave a comment if you would like, and thank you for watching.